Go ahead and get started here. So, excuse me, I will be reading this because my memory is not very good. But my name's Nick Schaefer. I'm with Wren Lake Fishing Guides. If any of you are not familiar with Wren Lake, it's in southern Illinois, just south of where 57 and 64 come together, about 10 miles south of Mount Vernon. A very good lake for crappie, catfish, and bass. We specialize in crappie and catfishing. Today's seminar is going to be about all year round crappie fishing. Crappie have a somewhat predictable pattern to what dictates their movements. It depends on the time of the year, the water temperature, weather, and a food source. As a whole, crappie, and for that matter all fish, rely on three things: food, spawning, and predation. Safety. Food and spawning dictate their movements. Thinking about spawning in the spring of the year, and the rest of the year it's all about feeding. I'm going to try to break down their patterns for you and how spawning and food come into play. Also try to explain where crappie will be and what you'll need to do to catch them in a month-by-month format. This may be earlier or later depending on the weather or your geographical location that particular year. Let me start out by saying there's always going to be some fish shallow, and there's always going to be some fish deep. These fish are usually loners. They hang out by themselves. They're not going to be in a schooling pattern. The tips I'm going to try to give you today are to follow the schooling fish, the fish that you can catch numbers on. Usually the fish you're going to find shallow or the fish you're going to find deep are going to be a bigger fish, but you may fish all day for one or two bites. So the tips I'm going to try to give you is to target numbers of fish and also quality of fish. The equipment that I'm going to be speaking about today, it's all Ozark rods. Vertical jigging, I'm going to use a 10-foot SSUL 1002. It's an ultralight jigging rod, 10-foot model. It's a two-piece. It works very good for vertical jigging in open water. It doesn't have a lot of backbone to it to lift fish out of a real heavy cover like the buckbrush that we have so much of in Wren Lake. But it's very sensitive to field bites in deeper water, fishing brush piles and stuff submerged in the lake. For the brush fishing, I'm going to be using the Ozark Brush Series rods. I helped Ozark design these specifically for fishing the buckbrush in Wren Lake. And then also for the casting, I'll use a 7-foot Ozark medium action spinning rod. If anybody has any questions about any of these rods, Grizzly Jig Booth has an Ozark display in there, and the Ozark guys are in there to tell you about any of them, or you can ask me any questions you have about them and I'll try to help you out. Yes, sir.
I noticed some have bait casters and some have spinning reels on it. What's the advantages and disadvantages or applications of those different kinds of reels?
Well, these are brush rods, the ones with the bait casters. The only thing that reel is for is to hold line. I'm not casting with this rod at all. It's just going to be a dipping situation. I use a heavier line in the brush. So I like the bait casting reel. It holds that heavy line better. You don't have as much, with a spinning type reel, when you open the bail with heavy line, a lot of times that line will just come coiling off the spool. So the bait caster doesn't have that problem as often. So that's why I use the bait casters there. For the vertical jigging and for the casting, I'm casting when I'm with the casting rod. So I'm using a spinning reel so it casts light line better. For the vertical rod, it's easier to adjust depth just by opening the bail, drop your jig to the bottom, close the bail. With the bait caster, it takes too long. You have overruns and stuff like that. The spinning reels manage the light line better. That's the reason of the two reels. The casting reel, as you can see, is a bigger reel, a larger spool. It's actually a bass style reel. that larger line capacity and higher gear ratio, I'm able to take up more line quickly. Make a long cast, you have a big belly in your line from the wind or whatnot. be able to take up that line quickly and set the hook, and also able to make longer casts. All right, starting out the first month of the year, January, dead of winter, and unlike this year, it's usually cold. But it can also be an excellent time to fish. You catch a lot of fish this time of the year and some really big fish. The fish are usually not going to be everywhere. You're not going to pull up to every brush pile and catch fish. The brush piles that you do pull up to that have fish on them, you can usually sit on them all day and catch fish. They usually, when you find a school of fish, there'll be a large school of fish. You'll likely have the lake to yourself in January because a lot of people are out chasing ducks, deer, or just fair weather fishermen that don't like the cold weather. But as long as you dress warm and use common sense, you can have a great day on the water. I always suggest you wear a life jacket and don't fish alone in the cold months. Last year I actually pulled out 2 individuals that had drowned in Red Lake last year. Because of the cold weather, they fell in and weren't able to make it back to their boat and ended up drowning. Neither one of them had a life jacket on. You know, it's a bad deal. I'm a hypocrite about it because I never wore a life jacket. Now looking back at it, I'm like, I really should have worn a life jacket all the time. I now have one of the Mustang inflatables. You know, you fish in cold weather, you're usually wearing heavy clothes anyway, and that inflatable life jacket, you don't even know that it's on you. So, you know, I recommend wearing a life jacket. Never fish alone. That way, if somebody falls out of the boat, your buddy can help you get back in the boat. But in January, the water temperature is usually in the 30s. The crappie will be in deeper water relating to structure near drop-offs in creek channels with bait close by. Bait is a big key in January. If there's not bait around, you're not going to have fish around. Fish will stay close to the bait year-round unless they're spawning. You know, Wren Lake, deeper water, we're talking 10 to 18 feet of water, usually with 20 to 25 foot of water close by. They're likely to be in big schools and not located on every set, as I was saying. When you find the set they're on, you probably won't need to move again. You can usually sit on that set and catch fish all day. A lot of times, it's not uncommon to catch over 100 fish off of one spot. Just sitting on one spot and catch fish after fish. They may shut down and pick back up through the day, but you can sit on one spot and catch them. This time of the year is when I'll be vertical jigging. You know, with the Ozark, 10-foot Ozark jigging rod. I like to use a 3/16 ounce jig head, which is larger than most people like to use. And I also use a 2-inch Lake Fork live baby shad. The live baby shad is a bigger bait. It matches the size of the fish and the bait fish in the winter. You know, you haven't had a spawn for several months. You know, the small fish in the lake are going to have grown into medium-sized fish. You know, most of your bait fish are going to be 2 inches. You know, a lot of people think you got to fish a really, really small bait in the wintertime. I will have fish inhale that bait. In the middle of January on the coldest days, I mean, they'll try to pull a rod out of your hand, they hit it so hard. Also, the larger bait is visible from a further distance. They can see it further away. The bigger a bait appeals to those fish because they're used to seeing that bigger bait that time of the year, and they may come from a little further away if they can see it. You know, if you can't see it, they're not going to come to it. So, also the lake forks are impregnated with garlic, so you don't have to keep reapplying scent if you like to use scent. It may make a fish hold on to the bait a little longer if they are sluggish that day. But although fish can be sluggish, they're still very catchable in the winter. We'll move on to February. Crappie are still in their winter pattern. They're not much different from January. Late in the month, the fish can start moving into an early pre-spawn pattern later in the month. I typically fish the same as I did in January until you see those fish start to move. Moving to March, crappie will start leaving their winter haunts and begin moving up the creek channels towards the spawning areas and feeding heavily. Water temps warm into the 40s and low 50s as the days get longer, sun shines a little bit more, and you get some warmer days. Fish can be hard to catch in March. Their constant movement and following the bait fish, they may hopscotch around 3 or 4 different brush piles in one day. I mean, they're constantly moving. You know, this is where spidering, trolling, and other tactics that cover a lot of water can be very productive. I still, for the most part, single pole fish, you know, vertical jig. I'm not a troller. I don't like trolling. But I'll start fishing brush piles in 6 to 12 foot of water, working as many as possible. Fishing, you know, hitting as many sets as I can, you know, stopping on a set. I may only fish it for 2 or 3 minutes. Because usually you can tell on your electronics if there's fish on there or not. You know, I'll stop if it looks like it's got fish on it, stop, fish it for 2 or 3 minutes. If I'm not catching fish, I'm moving. When I do start catching fish, I'll fish that set until they slow down, and then I'll move on to the next set. Okay, after that, we're moving into April. Water temps warming into the 50s and low 60s. Fish are full, their mind is just completely thinking about the spawn. It's the one time of the year that fish are not thinking about feeding. You know, as I said earlier, fish think about 2 things in general, spawning and feeding. Fish are going to be moving shallow into the spawning areas of the backs of the necks. On Wren Lake, that means buckbrush. You know, Wren Lake has 165 plus miles of shoreline, has about 140 miles of that stuff right there. If you are not fishing in that stuff when the fish are in the bushes, you're not fishing the right spot.
Is that all on the north end of the lake?
It is all the way around the lake. You know, there is, like I said, about 140 miles of that stuff. There's roughly 25 miles of shoreline that don't have brush on it. We fish from one end of the lake to the other end, all the way around. I mean, yes, the north end has an abundance of buckbrush, but so does the south end. I mean, I catch fish in South Markham, which is the farthest south cove you can go in buckbrush, and usually that's later in the year. A little bit later in the spawn that I move to the south end of the lake. The north end of the lake usually warms a little faster, being shallower, a little muddier, dirtier water, warms faster.
So is it all submerged then? And now
Typically in the spring of the year, the water is going to be about this high in the brush. There's going to be typically 1.5 to 4 foot of water in the brush. You can see how this fish is positioned right here in the middle of the bush. That's where you need to fish. So many people come into these bushes and you tell them, hey, you need to fish in the brush. So they pull up to a bush, this is where they're fishing. All of this is out here on the outside shoreline. When actually you need to be fishing right in it. Because when those fish are thinking about spawning, they're not thinking about feeding. They will eat an easy meal when presented to them. There's 2 types of rigs I use in the bushes. One is going to be a jig with a bobber stop on it. The bobber stop I use just for a visual reference, because once that jig goes in the water, you can't see it anymore. You can drop that jig in there. Well, I don't know, as soon as it hits the water, I don't know if that jig is 6 inches deep or all the way on the bottom. With that bobber stop, I'll set that bobber stop down there. I caught it. But you set that bobber stop on there, and I know when that bobber stop is getting close to the water, I'm right next to the bottom. When I bring it up, I'm a foot off of the bottom, because I want to fish that entire water column with the jig. Some days you'll notice that the fish are holding tight on the bottom. Some days you'll notice the fish are suspended in that brush. That's where I'll fish a jig a lot. The other way we fish these bushes is with a minnow and a slip bobber. Now this bobber slides on this line, it's not pegged here. So it's a compact thing. And you're going to set it right down through the middle of that bush as well. Trying to drop it down to get it right in front of that fish's face. Again, I'll fish this with a light wire hook and a small weight and a slip bobber with a minnow on the end.
Your slip bobber, what pound weight line is it?
I use 15-pound test line on that. I might get to that here in just a second. That's okay though. All right. You know, like I covered, we like to use a slip bobber and a minnow or dipping a jig in there. With that jig, I use a lighter weight jig. I'll use a 1/16 ounce jig for the shallower water. You have to put your bait inches from that fish's face, right in the middle of the thickest part of the cover. So we use heavier equipment, 10 or 12 foot heavy brush rods from Ozark, and 10 to 15-pound test line. You know, a lot of people don't think you can get away with using heavy line for crappie. They think you need to use 2 or 4 pound test. When you're fishing in a jungle like that and you hook into a big slab, I promise you, you want 15-pound test line on there. In that jungle of sticks, that line, I will get just as many bites with 15-pound test line as you will with 6. That does not affect the bite at all. I will probably catch more fish on 15-pound line than a guy fishing 6-pound line will. Because while he's broke off, he's retying, I'm putting another fish in the box.
Are you using braid or?
No, I use monofilament. Braid is too light. It blows with the wind, it's too limp. The monofilament, I'm using like a big game line that's very stiff, has a lot of memory to it because I don't want it blowing around a lot. I want it dropping straight in there where it's not wrapping around branches. You know, because most of the time when you get hung up, it's above the water where you get hung up more. Your line wrapping around the branches that are above the water because the wind's blowing it around or whatnot. So I'm just using a straight 15-pound, big game, high visibility monofilament. You know, this is last year's line, so it's kind of faded right now, but you know, the rod I use for dipping, again, I have that bobber stop on there, which I will adjust depending on the depth of the bush I'm fishing, or the depth of the area that I'm fishing. Some bushes may be 4 foot deep, some of them may be 2 foot deep, and I'll adjust that depth accordingly. You know, for a jig, most of the time I only use 2 colors. I use a black and chartreuse or a green chartreuse. You know, both of them are Mid-South tubes that I use. I prefer glow colors, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. When those fish are in the bushes, it's usually very dirty water, very muddy water, and I want a bait that's going to appeal to them when you put it right in front of their face. You don't really need to change a lot of colors. It's more about getting it in front of their face than it is color. May, water temp 60s up into the 70s. Crappie are fully in the bushes. You know, usually they move into the bushes about tax day, about the 15th of April, and they'll stay in the bushes until the end of May. And we'll catch them the whole time there. The end of May, the water temps moving into the upper 70s and low 80s. The fish will leave the bushes and head towards deeper water where they'll spend the rest of the summer. A telltale sign that the fish are moving out of the bushes, you'll start catching tons of small male fish. The little white crappie that are black as coal. They'll be about 4 or 5 inches long. You'll start catching tons of those. You won't be able to get a hook in the water. I mean, you'll be dropping your jig in there, hitting it as it's touching the water. You'll catch those fish in the same bushes that you were catching bigger fish a few days ago. When that happens, I start looking for the closest sets in deeper water. I'll move off that shoreline out into the first drop off, that first stake bed, first brush pile, first set of stumps that you come across. I'll start working those and moving out deeper until I find the fish. It's really surprising how quickly the fish can move out of the bushes and how quickly they can get to the middle of the lake. I've caught, you know, in the spring of the year when the fish move into the bushes, the males will turn black as coal. The females will still be white and their bellies will be full of eggs. But both the black and white crappie males will turn black as coal. A lot of people think they're catching black crappie when it's really male white crappie they're catching. I've seen catch fish in the middle of the lake, the end of May, the first part of June, that'll still be black as coal from being in and spawning. And they don't take long to lose their color once they've moved. So towards the end of May, the first part of June, I'll start moving to the middle of the lake. Water temps in June have started to climb into the low 80s. Fish are getting locked into their summer pattern, chasing shad in the middle of the lake. There are a lot of people think fish are hard to catch or don't bite in the summertime, when this is not true at all. Crappie are actively feeding in the summer, more so than any other time of the year, because they're hungry from a long, hard spawn, and the water temps warming, fish's metabolism speeds up because fish are cold-blooded creatures. The water temperature getting faster, the fish's water temperature getting warmer, fish's metabolism getting faster, paired with they've been in the bushes for a month to a month and a half spawning, those fish are hungry. I mean, they are fully thinking about feeding. They will follow the bait and use the structure closest to the food source. We'll be single pole fishing again, vertical jigging structure, anywhere from 8 to 10 foot of water, or anywhere from 8 to 12 foot of water, because that's usually where the bait fish are going to be holding that time of the year. The fish will be following the bait this time of the year, so they move a lot, but they'll stop on the structure to rest, hide from predators, and also to ambush more prey that are coming by. A perfect example is a drop-off going into a creek channel or a ditch or old river channel with a couple stumps on it. Those fish will just stage on those stumps, waiting for that bait to come across that flat, and they'll dart up and crane it. And when you start seeing those streaks on your screen, a lot of the Lawrence guys love seeing all those streaks on their screen coming up. That's what's doing that. Those fish are coming up ambushing those prey. When they hit those shad from the bottom, those streaks are actually the bait fish going up, not the crappie themselves moving up like that. We spend a lot of time searching for the bait with electronics in the summer, not necessarily looking for crappie. We're looking for structure, we're looking for bait, then we look for the closest structure to that bait. July is almost a mirror image of June. Fishing, brush piles, stake beds, stumps, any structure you've got in the middle of the lake, close to the bait fish. August, water temperatures are getting hot, running in the upper 80s to upper 90s depending on the summer. This year was fairly cool, but I've seen water temperature in the low hundreds before in August. And for me, August is one of the hardest months to catch numbers of quality fish. The fish are in the same patterns they were in June and July, but they seem to get more scattered for the numbers of quality fish. You don't get many good quality fish off of each set. You have to run a lot of sets. Just like each set doesn't hold as many fish on it, so you've got to run a lot more stops in a day and pick up one fish here, two fish there. You may fish a set that looks loaded up and not get a bite on it. Seem to catch a lot of little fish this time of the year. It's like the bigger fish just almost suspend in the water column and don't hold on any structure at all, just following the bait around. Moving on to September, water temperatures start to cool into the 70s. Fish are following the bait, moving shallower. I like to fish stake beds in 1 to 8 foot of water. That's where casting this jig in a cork comes into play a lot. Not really going to be able to demonstrate it in here, but we'll fish. A lot of times we'll be fishing that deep in a stake bed. It may have a foot of water in it, and fish will be holding in that in very, very shallow water. It is really amazing how big a fish you can catch in no water at all. You'd think you'd be able to see those fish swimming around in it, and you can't. With the jig and cork, I like to position the boat away from it, cast to a stake bed or a brush pile, slowly twitch that jig and dance in the bobber, slowly twitch the bobber and dance the jig through it. Again, I'm using a 7 foot or 7.6 medium action Ozark rod spooled with 6 pound test. That bigger reel allows me to cast longer distances, take up more line again. Fishing can be very productive this time of the year. Fishing those shallow stake beds, shallow stumps, fishing up in the creeks, fish laydowns of stake beds. Also fishing in the creeks, you'll fish a lot of laydowns. Again, fishing those laydowns, I'll use the same rods I was fishing the bushes with, being able to reach back into those bushes or brush and fish the back end of it where a lot of people don't fish. October, water's cooling into the 50s. Bait is gathering in giant schools and deeper holes along the riprap banks and along the bridges. Crappie are gorging on bait this time of the year. The bait fish get in giant schools, and the crappie get in giant schools with them. On Ren Lake, the bridges get hot. I mean, if any of you have ever driven across Highway 154 in October and early November, you know how many people fish those rocks and the bridges. You'll go out there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there'll be 30 boats underneath the sailboat bridge, and every one of them's catching fish. It's some guys are catching them better than others. A lot of people complain about all the small fish, and you do catch a lot of small fish that time of the year, but you also catch a lot of good fish. For the bridge fishing, we'll be vertical jigging 8 to 15 foot of water, depending on where the fish are showing up on my electronics. Always try to keep my bait within a foot of the bottom. You catch the better fish close to the bottom. You fish higher in the water column, you'll get more bites, but you catch a lot more small fish. Also in October, we'll catch a lot of fish in stake beds and sets in 2 to 14 foot of water. Some of the same ones you were catching in September can be good in October. Also, a lot of them on points in small pockets and stuff as deep as 14 feet. These sets usually don't have the quantity of fish that the bridges have, but they have better quality to them. You may pull up to a set and only catch 5 or 6 fish, but usually those 5 or 6 fish are all going to be 12 to 14 inch fish. November, the water temps cooling into the 50s and low 40 to 40s. The bridges are still hot, but at the beginning of the month, but start to slow. Quality will start to decrease as the month goes on. By the end of the month, the fish will move to the deep sets along the creek channels, where they'll spend the rest of the winter, and 10 to 18 foot, back to where they were in January. December is pretty well same as January. Fish in the winter pattern, 10 to 18 foot, close proximity to the bait, just like you were in January. Does anybody have any questions?
Like in the winter when they all school up, you get the big schools.
Yeah.
Do the size depend anywhere in the school? Or are the bigger fish on the bottom or the top, or?
Typically, they school up by size. You typically don't get into a school and start catching a bunch of little fish and catch big fish too. Typically, if you're catching little fish, that's what you're going to keep catching. Not saying you can't catch a better quality fish with them randomly, but usually it's going to be, size class of like a 5 to 7 inch fish or 5 to 9 inch fish, and a few keepers in there. Then you'll hit a school that's 12 to 14 inch fish, and all you catch is 12 to 14 inch fish with very few smaller fish. Perfect example of that, a couple years ago, me and my uncle both had trips, and just after Thanksgiving. He was fishing a set, he was catching some decent fish, weren't catching good fish, wouldn't catch a big fish. I told him, I said, I'm gonna run down and check this other set real quick. I ran down, hit it, and I pulled up, and within 5 minutes, we put like 10, 14 inch fish in the live well. I called him, I said, hey, get down here. He ran down, stopped right beside me. I mean, we're fishing rod tip to rod tip. Had the brush pile in between the two boats, and we sat there and caught 12 to 14 inch fish until our limits were full. I mean, it was just nothing but big fish. And then, when I hit a brush pile and all I'm catching is small fish, I catch about 6 or 8 of them and I move. You know, I don't feel the need to sit there and keep catching little fish, hoping to catch a bigger one. I'm gonna move spots to find that school of bigger fish. Anybody else?
Whenever you build stake beds, how many stake beds a year do you sink in a lake? And how many different spots?
Depends on the year, depends on how much.
Depends on what they look like on a graph.
Yeah, depends on what they look like on a graph. I mean, depends on how they're holding fish. If they're holding fish good, no need to mess with it, you know. If they start to, and typically I don't sink ones in the same spot because I've been doing this for quite a while. A lot of people know my boat, you know, will follow me around. Not necessarily, well, some people will just pull right up next to you and mark a spot and drive off. But, you know, typically a stake bed, I may move it 50 yards, 100 yards. I may not even put one back in the same spot. I may fish it until that one just doesn't have anything left and wait a couple of years and go put another one there. Or may not put another one there at all. Typically, I would say I probably set close to 10,000 stakes a year. You know, between driven into the bottom, and I like to drive them more than I like to build a stake bed. You know, a lot of people use pallets or whatnot and build a square stake bed. I don't like doing that. I like to drive them in the bottom. They last a lot longer. You know, I've got a stake driver I can drive in 18 to 20 foot of water. You drive stakes in 18 to 20 foot of water, they're going to be there in 20 years. Right. I mean, you know, you get pontoon boats out there that pull an anchor through a stake bed that's a pallet. You get hooked on it, he's going to drag it somewhere, you know, who knows where it's going to end up. May flip it over, knock all the blocks off of it, and then it floats away. You drive them in the bottom, they pull an anchor through it. The anchor gets hung, they pull one stake out of the bottom, or 2 stakes out of the bottom. I've still got a perfectly good stake bed there. You know, typically, if I'm driving them, I'm driving anywhere from 75 to 200 stakes in one location. You know, I don't like little bitty stake beds.
Right.
I want one I can pull up and
Fish from one side to the back.
yeah, if it's got fish on it, you know, we can pull up there and catch 20 or 30 fish out of it. You know, a lot of guys will put a little bitty stake bed, only got 20 stakes in it. You pull up and catch 2 fish out of it. Well, that's all that stake bed held because it's the size of a 5-gallon bucket.
Right.
So, you know, I've built a lot of stake beds just outside the bushes. A lot of clients don't like fishing in the bushes. You get some older guys that can't, that they got a fish sitting down and, you know, they getting frustrated, getting hung up a little bit, and we'll pull up. They're like, all right, you guys fish this bush right here. Hey, George, drop yours right back there. And he drops back there and pulls out a big female. Oh,
Right.
he doesn't know it's there, but I did, you know. And there'll be 200 or 300 stakes back there, and he can sit back there and catch 10 or 15 fish. That those fish have either just moved in or getting ready to move into the bushes, or just spawned and moved out, and that's the first thing they hit.
Right.
You know, those things don't always hold fish, but when the fish are in the bushes, they can usually catch 3 or 4, you know, and a guy that's in the back of the boat having a hard day, you know, that and usually ones he catches are the great big ones, and, you know, that made his day.
Right.
You know, so everybody caught fish, and he caught the big one of the day. That's all he cares about.
What do you use for your steaks?
Like to go to the sawmill and get hardwood, just scrap. I don't like to pay for them because I like to drive a bunch of them. You know, I'll go to the sawmill, and you know, there was a sawmill there by the house that had a contract. They were building 2x2 posts for somewhere. It was all out of oak, and they were actually 2 inch by 2 inch, not like you buy from the lumberyard. A 2x2 is 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. They were good posts. Well, if they had any split to them, any cracks to them, or any bark on it, they threw it in a pile out behind the place, and I could go up and get a pickup truck load for $5. I'd pull up there and I'd load the pickup truck and go on. Well, a lot of times now I'm having to buy boards. Boards that have cracks or splits or anything, and then rip them with a table saw. But you know,
And how long are they?
it depends on the depth of water. You know, I'm not going to drive a 4-foot long stake in 2 foot of water, but at the same time, I'm not going to drive a 2 foot long stake in 18 feet of water. You know, depending on the water depth, I would say typically our deeper ones are gonna be 4 to 5 foot long. You're gonna drive probably 1 foot to 1.5 foot of that into the bottom, so you're gonna have 3 foot sticking out. The shallow ones are gonna be 2 to 3 foot long, and you're gonna have 1 foot to 1.5 foot sticking out. Now, another thing with stake beds, a lot of people, in my opinion, put stakes too close together. You know, they'll have stake here, 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 you know, there's no room for those fish to swim in between them. I've been known to pull up to people's stake beds that are in good places and pull stakes out and move them to the outside edges and open up holes through them where bigger fish can get in there. And you know, because the fish doesn't want to be stuck in between two boards. He wants, you know, if a fish can get one eye behind a stake, he feels hit. So they'll get more space in there, and those fish can get around and move around in there better. I feel that those hold more fish and hold bigger fish when the fish has a chance to move around in them a little bit. Big fish don't like getting trapped into tight corners and stuff. Any other questions?
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
Seen you?
Yeah, he knows what he's talking about. I've been out on the boat with him. We caught some fish. We caught some fish.